Hello, everyone. Thanks as always for coming out. I wrote in the introduction on the webpage that I'm kind of handing in an assignment today because I think of myself as a student here at 52 Living Ideas. And I look at people like Shrikant or anybody else who presents here as faculty. And I'm coming up on a full year of spending my time here looking at your lovely faces in these boxes. And when I was preparing, I'm presenting once a month, and I said, what could I do to almost test myself to see what have I learned in the last year? What can I pull from these different meetups, especially things that I've learned that apply to polymathic thinking, to be a comprehensivist. So the bright spot begins with coming to these meetups. I came face to face with the imposter syndrome, which is something I'm going to talk about in my presentation today. And I made some startling realizations about what it is. I also learned things about polymathy from here, The Sparks of Genius by Bernstein, who presented here, and Dr. Codalesa, who basically taught me anyway that polymathy is not this real deep understanding in these multiple areas, that it really is a combination of things, and that I kind of belong here on the spectrum because I have interests that go in different areas. So I said to myself, I'm going to split you into two. I want you to become a professor and a student. And the educator in me came out, and I said, what assignment can I give this guy that would kind of show me that he's pulled something away from the last year, especially if he's going to present at a Comprehensivist Wednesday? Instantly, the word music popped out. And I was so excited because without almost any thought at all, I could instantly take music down a mathematical channel, the physics of how some of these instruments work. And I was a drummer as a kid. I was a trained drummer. So I said, wow, this is going to be so easy. I could just start talking about all these different things that I already know about music. It's going to be so easy. And then I stopped for a second and I said, how are you going to present all of this in 30 minutes? What are you trying to accomplish? So what I did is I listened to the professor. And I was very excited when I went to him and I said, look, I have all these books. I have all this experience. I'm just going to throw out this presentation. It's going to come real easy. And then the professor said to me, no, you're not. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to choose a subject that you think can improve your polymathic thinking. And I did that. It was music. But I don't want you to use a computer, not yet. I don't want you to read any of the books that you have. What I want you to do is stare at the word music on a piece of paper. And I applied something called the Pomodoro Method. I have a clock behind me that is digital. It's a chess clock, and I have it set for 25 minutes on one side, 5 minutes on the other. The Pomodoro Method is basically deep practice, deep concentration for 25 minutes, and then you take the other 5 minutes and clear your head. So my professor said to me, I want you to stare at the word music. And I'm kind of bucking myself. I'm going, but I know so much already that I can present. No technology. Sit down at the board or at the table, write the word music down, and I want you to start from what you don't know. Don't talk about drumming. You played drums even though it was years ago because you have that in you. What's the point? I want you to sit there and maybe think of an instrument that you know nothing about, or a type of instrument. And what came to me were the wind instruments, which I know nothing. And I was to sit there for the first Pomodoro, that I call it, for the first 25 minutes and not write anything down, to think to myself all of the wind instruments that I could name and what they sound like. Would you all mind just for a moment, regardless of how much of a musical background you have, would you mind just taking a couple of moments thinking about the different wind instruments the names, what they sound like? Got it? So what I did is then I actually wrote them down. And this is what I came out with very quickly: a flute, saxophone, recorder, harmonica, and I went on and on. The list is about maybe 20 instruments here. And then I came to bagpipes. And my professor came over to me and said, "Hey, Mike, I noticed you have a little star next to bagpipes. Why is it?" And I answered my professor and I said, "I don't like the way they sound." He goes, "Why not?" I go, "I don't know." And my tone of voice was almost like I was angry about it. He goes, "It's a beautiful instrument. Do you know how they work? Do you know what a drone pipe is?" I said, "No, I have no idea." He says, "Well, a drone pipe on a bagpipe will just put out a constant note that the piper can play over." I go, that's interesting. "Do you know about the airflow of a bagpipe? How the sound is produced?" And I said, "No." He goes, "You still look a little upset. What's the matter with the bagpipe?" I said, "I don't like the way they sound." He said, "Why not?" And I realized every time I've heard a bagpipe, except for once, it was at a funeral. I have police officers, I have firefighters in my family. So every time I've heard that beautiful instrument, I learned a little bit about the bagpipe with this study that I did. It's a beautiful instrument. But my interpretation only went through the lens of my family, of hearing it, except one time. And it was at the movie, or during the movie Titanic. And if you've seen the movie, there is a scene where Leonardo DiCaprio goes below deck and he's at a party. And I'll talk more about this later. And at that party, there is a bagpipe being played by an Irish band. And there, I believe it's called an uilleann or an uilleann. And the piper is seated while they play. It's not a standing bagpipe. And I told my professor, "I love that scene." My professor said, I thought you don't like the bagpipe." I go, "No, that scene, I know it so well. These musicians are downstairs. It's in steerage. It's third class. And everybody surrounding them, they're having the time of their life. They're dancing like crazy. Leonardo DiCaprio is taking Kate Winslet around in a circle. They're drinking beer. The band is having a phenomenal time." He goes, "Well, why do you like it there?" And I said, I'm not really sure, but there's something about that scene that really hit me." He says, "Okay, step one is done. You kind of broke the ice there a little bit. And you learned something about an instrument that you didn't like." And he said, "What if you heard a song being played on the bagpipe, or a piece on the bagpipe, but what if it was played on a different instrument in a genre that you like, a genre of music?" I said, "Okay, what's next?" Same thing. Sit at the table and just let me know, how many different genres of music can you name without writing anything down? As a matter of fact, I want you to put your head down on the table and think about a memory that is attached to a genre of music. And I mentioned earlier, I was a drummer as a kid. I was a real serious drummer for a while. So initially, I just wanted to bark out the genres that I was comfortable with. It was funk and fusion and R&B, a little bit of swing jazz. But I didn't do that right away. And I just thought to myself, would you do the same right now? Take 30 seconds or a minute. Think of a genre of music, and can you attach a memory to it without hearing any music? You got one? I won't ask now. We're going to have a lot of time to do this in the breakout room. So what I did, once I got a little better at this, because the first time thinking about the wind instruments, I was very uncomfortable. A, I knew nothing about them. And two, I was a little upset at my professor because I didn't understand why I couldn't use technology. Because if I could just say, "Hey Siri, how many wind instruments are there?"
Here's what I found.
You don't want to know what's on this phone. There is so much information on this phone by that one little request, but I was missing the point. So my professor had me do it again with the genres, and I've got about 40 here that just came pouring out of me. Most of them are based from the West because I grew up in the States, and most of the music, but then as I got better at drumming, I began to branch out. I'll just throw a few at you. So obviously rock and roll, I have soft rock, classic rock, punk rock, new wave, folk, rockabilly, indie, jazz, bebop, swing, rap, R&B, soul, funk, blues, classical, country rock, bluegrass, disco, West African, reggaeton, calypso, and on and on and on. And most of these genres I can attach a memory to, some from learning music I didn't want to learn as a drummer, because I wanted to be a studio drummer when I was playing. And in order to be a studio drummer, my teacher was very strict, never allowed me to play on the drum set. It was only on the pad. Very technical, very proud to be a studio drummer. There were certain genres of music that he wasn't going to let anywhere near me. So what happened is, as I'm thinking about these genres, my professor picks up the paper and he goes, Mike, I noticed something. You have a little smiley face next to new wave, and you have a little smiley face next to disco. What's up with those? And I said, well, professor, I don't know. I just circled them. He goes, I thought you were like a funk, a little bit of jazz. You were being trained classically. You got a smile on new wave, disco. And, I turn a little red and I look at the professor and I go, well, I have two of the memories. You got to remember, you asked me to attach a memory to these different genres of music. So I did. He goes, you don't have any memories of bebop or swing? I go, yeah, I do. It was really, really hard to play. And there were improvisers in bebop and jazz that blew me away. But yeah, of course. How about, tango? Oh yeah, I remember part of being a drummer was you might play at a wedding. And if you're going to play at a wedding, there might be the culture that would want you to play a tango or a polka. So you'd have to learn that. He goes, you're avoiding the question. Why did you put the smiley face next to disco and new wave? The reason it's next to new wave is the band that I was playing in, we did a gig at Iona College in New Rochelle, and we played really, really well that night. The next time they had bands there, they had a new wave band, which was nothing at all like the music I was playing in my band. But what happened that night? Have you ever seen anyone dance to new wave or to punk? If you are a classically trained ballerina and you saw me dancing to new wave, you would shudder in horror, because I'm basically jumping up and down and I'm running in a circle. That's all I'm doing. Had long hair back in those days, and I had just finished a gig the week before where I felt that I musically had done my job as a drummer. Yet a week later, I am jumping up and down like a stray cat with long hair, running in circles, and I'm having the time of my life. Now, why the disco? Being very serious about drumming, I ran into John Travolta in Saturday Night Fever. He was on Saturday Night Live too. When Saturday Night Fever came out, I went from this real serious drummer. I did have long hair, but I cut it at one point. And I actually used hairspray. I owned a Huckapoo shirt. I owned platform shoes. And I went to discos. If you break disco music down technically, which was part of the work that I did here, I did look at the mathematics and the structure behind some of these music. If you want to compare some of the composing that goes on with classical music, the structure and the math and the beauty of how it's constructed, to disco, there was no drumming in disco. There was no drummer. It was compressed, synthesized music. Yet, when I went to the discos, there were girls that I liked, that when Travolta came out with Saturday Night Fever, they fell in love with him. I liked these girls. I liked going to the disco. The next thing you knew, I'm dancing to, I was terrible, but I'm having the time of my life. Around the same time this was going on, I went to see a drummer named Dave Weckel. If there are any drummers here, Dave Weckel today is one of the premier drummers just around. This is about 30 years ago, maybe more. I caught him in maybe 78 or 1980. And this is where I got hit with the imposter syndrome. So what I'm going to set the stage for you is the joy and the fun that I had dancing to new wave and disco was completely dismantled one day watching this guy Weckel play drums. He was playing in a band called Night Sprite. Nobody had really heard of them. I believe Dave was from Louisiana. They were a phenomenal funk fusion band. And I watched them at the Loft in Mamaroneck in New York here. Dave Weckel was playing a piece of music that had a samba feel to it. You don't need to know anything about the drums to follow this story. He had his right stick on a cowbell. He had his left hand alternating between a snare drum and his hi-hat. And if you can just imagine what a samba sounds like, embellished with horns that have a jazz feel. So now it's fusion, it's samba and jazz. And Weckel is providing the backdrop with the bass player, absolute beautiful music coming from this kit. And then the song takes a turn and goes to a bridge. And Weckel's left hand now goes to his crash cymbal. His right hand goes to his ride cymbal and starts alternating with his snare drum. The same exact feel that he was playing between the cowbell and the hi-hat, he has now changed hands and is creating the same sound with the cymbals and the snare drum. I don't know how old I am. I'm 18, 19. And all of a sudden, I got hit with a wave of, I don't really know the right word, but basically I said to myself at this age, which was the wrong response, I will never, ever be able to do what this man just did. I was completely blown away by what Dave Weckel just did. Now, the healthy response should be, hey, look at that. Go home and figure out how to do that, which in the work that I had done to prepare for this meetup, today a modern drummer could see Dave Weckel in a video, could have every note of his sticking charted out for him and watch it and imitate it and take lessons. But what happened to me that day was the complete opposite feeling that I felt with dancing to disco, which hit me while I was doing this work with something that I came face to face with. When you get technically good at something, now I can take this conversation away from music. We could be talking about you moving up in a college philosophy department, or you can be really good in mathematics. And what happens is, as you get better and better and better, sometimes people get split over what is more important to you, your technical ability, your accuracy, your dexterity. So I'm talking musically now, but it could be, you can really plug anything in here. And then the other side of that is, well, what about improvisation? What about feel? If I were to play 4 quarter notes, just 4 in a row on a table, it would mean nothing. But if I accent the 4th one or syncopate it, all of a sudden I'm putting a little feel into that. That dilemma carried me for years and years and years, because when I saw Weckel perform, one of the issues I had was the imposter syndrome. When I began playing drums after seeing that, I watched him many more times and I continued to play, but I never really got over what it is that I saw that day at the loft. Working through this little project took me face to face with that 18-year-old kid again, because here Shrikant led me to taking that imposter syndrome and saying, throw it away. When you said, Shrikant, our very first meetup we did on the art of learning, you said to me, I'm glad you know more about this book than I do. As a matter of fact, I'm really happy when I know the least in the group. So that was quite profound for me. So thank you for that. So my professor said, okay, we're making a little headway here. What about the other aspects of music? Where do you want to take it? And I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, well, put that music down again. And where else can you take the conversation? And here are some of the things that I wrote down. You can just listen to these words. And if you don't mind, as they're coming out, would you just apply them to any discipline you want? Because they're all musical, but you just off the top of your heads, let me know where they fall in your purview. Acoustics, sound waves, radio tubes, airflow, circle of fifths, octaves, compression, tension, harmony, voicings, full and half steps, synthesizers, frequency, time signatures, static, feedback, muffling, dissonance, atonal, breath control, lung capacity. What happened by making this list is I sat there looking at the word music and I go, what are the applications? Where does it take me? What other disciplines? And these different ideas just came running out. And my professor said, you got a little star next to lung capacity. And I said, yeah, that's like, you're playing a wind instrument, you need it. And the professor said to me, what about the piano player? Does the posture matter to the piano player? Now, where's the connection? Well, I'm a chess teacher, and I caught myself and I realized that I'm constantly telling my chess students, don't compress your chest when you're playing chess. If you're going to do that, if you're going to go into a pose, make sure your back is straight and that your lungs are filled and able to breathe properly. Because what happens if you compress your chest? What happens to the lung capacity and the airflow? It diminishes. What does that affect? The oxygen that goes to your brain. So I already knew that back here, but going through this little process, it started to come to the front. And then I looked at full and half steps. Have you seen the movie Jaws? A lot of us my age, I wouldn't go in the water the whole summer. If you take an E and an F, those notes are a half step away from one another. They're not necessarily in a key because you don't know what came before the E or the F or what came after. But if you just play that E and F, dun-dun, 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 you know where I'm going? It creates dissonance. That memory of that movie came pouring out of me. And then this happened. Let me know if you know where this is from. I need a little water. Anybody know the name of the song or where it came from? You can just call it out. Anyone, you can unmute. Anyone, if you know it, I can do it again. Jeff, do you know? No?
Do it again. Sure,
Yes,
Titanic. Yeah.
Titanic. Yes, my whistling is not so good. But why did I whistle that? Going through this assignment that I gave myself, when I was going through these wind instruments and I was thinking about that scene from Titanic when they were down in steerage and playing, they kind of collided with one another. The reason I like that scene so much, prior to going downstairs and hanging out with the people, if you remember the movie Titanic, Jack Dawson, the character, saves Kate Winslet from jumping off the ship. And as a reward, he gets invited to the first class dining room. What kind of music was being played in the first class dining room? It was all classical, chamber music. Everybody is in a tuxedo. And Leonardo DiCaprio's sitting there saying, just last week I was sleeping under a bridge and now I'm drinking champagne with all you good people on the finest ship in the world. I love that scene. And I discovered doing my little workout here why I love it so much, because he's in the world of classically trained musicians and they are phenomenal. You cannot play classically. I know Maxine could talk forever about this, especially about your grandson. If you're a classically trained actor or musician, the amount of work that goes into producing that music, the dexterity that you need. Yet, when he goes down into steerage and they're drinking beer and they're playing the music and everybody is running around, I realized that I'm bringing back the same conflict I had with myself as that young drummer. What is the right approach? Should I be classically trained and only play jazz and classical music? Or is it okay for me to take a little detour and play disco and play new wave and play funk if I can get the people in front of me dancing? That movie is an excellent, excellent example of that. Let me conclude with this. When I whistled that song, I was looking at all these wind instruments and I caught myself whistling during the day. You know what I realized? I don't know how I did that. I know how to whistle. I know how to purse my lips and try to stay in key. But here's my question. I created a wicked problem for myself. How do humans whistle in key? I understand physically how I can mimic maybe a valve or the key on a saxophone to limit the airflow. I think I understand the mechanics of whistling, but what I don't know is how did I whistle in key? Well, I tried to whistle in key, but how do humans do that? I'm going to ask Sanjay when I see him again. I'm going to ask a neuroscientist. Is it part of my built-in nature? And it's not a question of people who can or cannot whistle. It's really a question of people who can whistle. How do they stay in key? For the life of me, I can't think of it. So what I'd like to do is, hopefully this will come up, is show you a short video. It's actually the theme to Titanic being played by a classical ensemble. So I will put that in the chat. The sound quality is tough sometimes to hear it all the way through. But what you can do on your own time one day is take a look at that, and whatever you got from it now, we can start talking about in the breakout room. But if you have a real chance to do a deep dive on that, you'd be amazed if you watch it more than once, which you'll pull out of there. So what do you say, Shrikant? We'll hit the breakout rooms.
I would like to, with your permission, I would like to add one more assignment.
Oh, please.
Everybody. And they can combine it with anything else that you've asked them to do.
Sure.
I just want to recount in 2 minutes what you did. And there's several very interesting ideas that you used. One is that you ask the question, what is it that I don't know? And you focused on that. You had this dialogue going of two people, a person who is doing something and a person who is monitoring it and evaluating it. So you broke yourself into two people. You very deliberately searched your memory multiple times, leveraging your past experience. You use the Pomodoro technique to give yourself an assignment for a limited period of time and doing it over and over again, which layering on the previous work that you've done. There's considerable amount of self-reflection, not just putting things down, but just looking at it and asking a deeper question. You looked at your response to virtuosity. You used the technique of using different words to trigger various things that would come to our minds. You looked at the core issue of the choosing between structure and free flow. You talked about confronting problems, and you talked about the value of coming up with wicked problems. So that's a quick summary of various techniques I saw you use. So go ahead. Shall we start the breakout rooms?
Yeah, I think also somebody had mentioned to maybe clarify the issue in the breakout room. Essentially, we can use the time. Obviously, music is a ridiculously broad topic, but I just try to give you an idea of how I just with some reflection, it took me in some direction. So basically, after just hearing what I had to say or seeing that video, whatever it is that you have in your mind that might bring something of interest to anyone in the breakout room, the conversation will just flow from that point.